Well, Vasily already mentioned listeriosis as a challenge, and I will deep dive into that. Right, listeriosis in the poultry industry, that's the title of my presentation. As was mentioned, listeriosis outbreaks are caused by the food products intaken, and it's such a challenging problem that the EU keeps on developing the guidelines that would ensure the safety of the food products. Right now, 6 types of listeria have been isolated. They are listed here in a slide. And just Listeria monocytogenes is pathogenic for humans and animals. Therefore, eradicating this bacteria is one of the ways to ensure food safety. In Russia, listeriosis has been officially isolated in 1992, that's 30 years ago, and listeriosis is way behind salmonellosis and campylobacter bacteriosis, but mortality is higher, and the number of outbreaks of listeriosis with a high mortality was caused by the infected food products. People get infected by eating non-thermally processed poultry meat, but listeriosis can be caused by water intake or plant food intake. Pigeons, ducks, geese, not just turkey, and chicken could be the sources of listeriosis.
Болеют чаще цыплята молодые куры, и, как правило...
Chicks are primarily affected, and listeriosis is something that chicks are more susceptible to as opposed to adult birds. And lack of appetite, lack of mobility, conjunctivitis, progressive weakness, nervous signs are amongst the most widespread signs, and a bird dies 3 to 5 days after the clinical signs appearance if you don't do anything. The sources of contamination include employees of the farm, environment, high non-compliance with hygiene rules, shoes worn by employees and visitors, unless, of course, they are disinfected. Soil, dust, rodents are amongst the sources. Insects, primarily flies, construction dust that accumulates if the area is not cleaned. And the secondary sources include packaging materials and so on and so forth. I'm a microbiologist by background, therefore I'm more interested in studying listeria as bacteria. And listeria can survive both cold temperatures and hot temperatures, as you can see the ranges shown in the slide, and the pH range is also huge. They can survive in the acid environment and the non-acid environment. Mr. Timorazov was the author of the slide. I copied it from his presentation. It shows the sources and the ways of spreading of listeria. Rodents, equipment, environment, feed, poultry, hatcheries, employees, waste, water, and the slaughterhouse. And as mentioned, this microbe can survive cold temperatures such as 4 degrees centigrade above zero. And this is usually the temperature that we maintain in a fridge. Fresh products are not as dangerous. However, if you run high temperatures when you smoke some food products, listeria start proliferating because this is a perfect environment for them. This diagram shows the way this microbe affects a plant. I already mentioned that this bacteria is contained in the soil. It's dangerous for humans. Yesterday and the day before yesterday, we talked about AGPs, antibiotic growth promoters. It's, well, Virginia mycin suppresses lots of microbes, including mycoplasmas and listerias. And if you use APGs at a poultry farm, listeria might become resistant to it, and Virginia mycin will no longer be effective in your poultry farm. And I believe that AGPs, if not controlled in their administration, uh, promoted the prevalence of listeriosis in the past few years. In the customs union countries, the lack of CFE in 25 grams of product is the threshold parameter. Colony forming units, even in small numbers, can cause this disease in humans. So even if you get very few CFUs, they still can uh, cause the disease, especially in people with weakened immunity. Food products that do not promote the spread of listeria, the threshold parameter is 100 CFUs in 1 gram. While for those that might promote their growth, it's the lack of CFU units in 25 grams of product. There are specific threshold for baby formula and food products for children. The figures are shown in the slide. It's 100 CFUs per gram and lack of CFUs in 25 grams of product. Listeriosis is difficult to diagnose. It takes a lot of effort. You need to have two accumulating environment to ensure final diagnosis of listeriosis. You need to identify listerias, and that requires molecular biological techniques which are quite widespread to identify DNA, such as PCR, polymerase chain reaction, and other additional techniques might be used to study biomaterials. For instance, two different environments and just for the sake of example, that's the L monocytogenes 766. So that's the nutrient agar for listerias, and the test strain of listeria growth in the Pulcam agar. This is the image I took personally. This is listeria in the nutrient soup. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope I'm on time. Thank you. Any questions? We do have questions from the floor. That's great. I was just wondering, since you're a microbiologist, how many listeriosis outbreaks have you been able to diagnose with Epizootology techniques and prove that it was the poultry flock that was the source? I don't deal with food products, and we only plan to diagnose listeriosis. Our lab is quite small, so I don't have any personal experience. The last image was the one that I said that I took myself, but actually it was taken by our colleagues from the regional lab. We specialize in other diseases, so I cannot give you the statistics off the top of my head. One of the questions was how to prove that the main source was the poultry farm. Well, first and foremost, we see antibodies to listeria, and we can isolate listeria in live birds. Well, at least we can do this now. PCR monitoring is the way forward. We apply it to food products, and then first, and then we study and monitor poultry farms and feed. Sometimes we see outbreaks caused by premixes, feed premixes. And all of a sudden, you see lots of positive results returned by PCR tests. And now we can apply PCR tests to live birds. We've been doing that in the past 2 years. Another question is about Virginia mycin. Let's talk about the role of AGPs in reducing the risks of contaminating the food products.
Мы работаем вместе, да, со Светланой Владимировной. Это был ее слайд по Virginia Мицину, поэтому да.
Well, Svetlana and I work together, and the slide devoted to Virginia mycin was the one that she is responsible for. Please go back to this slide. Please go back to the slide specifying the different types of listeria. Right, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I would rephrase the issue. It's not about, we should not be talking about the number of cases of people getting infected by poultry. There are 6 different types of listeria, and these are soil bacteria that circulate in the environment. If you attended our advanced training courses, you know this, but let me reiterate it once again. Bacteria can transfer the resistant genes within the family. For instance, E. coli can transfer the resistance gene to Salmonella or Klebsiella that cause different diseases in humans. So I would suggest that Listeria monocytogenes that circulates in the soil and everywhere just transfer the resistance genes to each other, and we will not be able to track whether poultry is the main source. That's the first issue. The second issue is the AGPs. So let's go back to the Virginia mycin slide. Right, thank you. As you can see, almost all AGPs have a bacteriostatic effect and are administered in low doses, which means that bacteria become resistant because AGPs do not have a bactericidal exit, and antibiotics do not disintegrate during thermal processing, which means that lots of resistant listeria and other microorganisms get dumped in the field. Soil bacteria become resistant, and this is your circulation route. And it's one of the reasons for antibiotic resistance. E. coli within 11 days become resistant to a 1,000-fold dose of antibiotic. And we use AGPs almost on a constant basis. And Vasily, you mentioned that a couple of years back we started doing this or that, but a couple of years back the AGP legislation was amended. Now you can apply AGPs in any amount you like. Moreover, producers, if they have a pharmaceutical license, can produce independently antibiotics and various substances. In other words, large corporates, instead of using antibiotics and drugs that have to be approved, can now manufacture their own substances and AGPs. And for them, that reduces the production costs 1.5 to 2-fold. But they use AGPs in the amounts they like. And that causes the resistance of listeria to different antibiotics. So that's why listeriosis becomes a problem. It becomes more virulent since listeria transfers resistant genes uh, that cannot be killed off by any antibiotics. So this is a logical consequence of the actions that we have taken. Svetlana and I are friends, but we are on the opposing, we adhere to opposing views professionally. In AGPs back in the Soviet time, in EU, are banned or are heavily regulated. Actually, I'm still confused. Is that an attempt to give up, to give up AGPs? Listeria circulates because of the Virginia mycin administration, or should we use other AGPs? So actually, I had to revise some of my views after I listened to your lectures, and now I have a different view on the role of AGPs. As for Listeria monocytogenes, genus is a monostrain for humans, and we can find it in the food products. It's not a mix of different strains that adapted to antibiotics. Well, how come we are only talking and we have only isolated just one strain? Some strain can be transferred from birds to birds, including vertical transfer, more effectively, and we as professionals should at least rule it out. As far as Virginia mycin is concerned, I don't think it would be difficult for us to take the strains that we have isolated for decades on end and see how resistant they are to various AGPs. They are frozen at a temperature of -80 degrees centigrade. Well, we still have 8 minutes for the Q&A, and we can discuss some of the global and solve some of the global problems for the humankind. Listeriosis is a recent challenge. And well, in Russia, we started isolating it only in 1992. That's like 30 years ago. And I was just wondering, let's discuss it, by the way, how promising it would be to develop biological vaccines with a high specificity. Can we develop vaccines against listeriosis? What do you think? Well, if we compare listeriosis and salmonellosis, I would primarily focus on listeriosis because of a higher lethality among humans. But it's still an outstanding question. Is listeriosis a problem because the bacteria circulates in the poultry farms, or just the environment is the main source of listeria? We tend to forget that many infections live in the environment, and their resistance have nothing to do with antibiotics, because they have always been resistant to antibiotics for thousands of years. And medics start focusing on the use of antibiotics for some reason, and antibiotic resistance, but there are polyresistant bacteria, and we as vets are interested in solving this problem. We can be more effective in our efforts as opposed to policymakers who focus on environment and are not experts on this complex problem. Any other questions or comments from the floor? Before we start discussing vaccination against listeriosis, and I'm talking about vaccination of breeders and broilers, we need to focus on the means to prevent contamination. For instance, thermal processing of amino acids could be a good way forward. The efficacy was proven. Well, the presenter stated that listeria can survive at different temperatures, but how does it is it affected by the thermal processing? Of course, high temperatures destroy most bacteria and amino acids. Well, we did some tests, and organic and non-organic acids can replace AGPs, and listeria might be controlled with acids. Well, let's consider this option if we believe that the main route is contaminated feed and water. It might be a way to control the spread of listeriosis. Well, we've been using acids against salmonellas for a long time, so I guess we can make the feed premixes totally safe, but I don't think it would make sense because it would destroy vitamins and other nutrients. Amino acids will be misfolded, and the salmonella history is a good illustration that you can hardly eradicate a specific microorganism 100%. It will always circulate. You can waste your efforts and money as long as you want, but microorganisms will still survive. But we need to ensure the right balance. Listeria is not a good example. I don't think it's a way forward to hope for the best and just hope that poultry infected with listeria will survive. Well, some of them will contaminate food products in any case. Let's recall sapronosis and other bacteriophages. On the one hand, they are very specific and the efficacy might not be as high. But on the other hand, they are prone to spontaneous circulation, especially if the pathogens are in great numbers. Different types of listeria might cause that. For instance, we saw that as far as the Pseudomonas aeruginosa was concerned, and it was sensitive to antibiotics. For instance, Blipus bacillus is like an alcoholic with hepatitis C who drinks more alcohol. I'm trying to compare that with antibiotics, administration of antibiotics. Just two brief comments. I listened attentively to what you had to say. There was a question about the biochemistry, and all of you are experts, and this is true for all the animals, not just poultry. However, there is a certain type of confusion. For instance, when we run blood tests for glucose, you do that fasting. On day one, we discussed the outsourced labs that run bovine tests. Well, I personally witnessed the following. A herd manager demonstrated me results of the very same cow broken down by years, but it's not a representative sample. Dry cows, calves, and lactating cows should be the 3 different categories, and 6 different animals should be included into different categories. So it doesn't matter when you do the biochemical tests before feeding or after feeding. I will not be able to dwell on the virginomycin. Well, you are a scientist, right? So let me clarify something for you. Are you, do you represent a commercial firm or a scientific firm? Anyway, you have to understand some marketing rules.
Ну, для примера. Ну, например, тогда лучше использовать немножко другой пример. Вот какой антибиотик...
Well, use a different antibiotic for the sake of an example. There are antibiotics that cost 100%, sorry, 100 times less, sorry, 4 times less than virginomycin. You talk to flock managers, right? What kind of AGPs do they use? They, you know, keep a close eye on their costs. We're talking about AGPs, right? Antibiotic growth promoters. Exactly. And back in the Soviet times, it was used, and we're talking about decades of administration. I have my reasons to criticize virginomycin, but use the other one as an example for marketing purposes. What's the right word to use here? I'm at a loss for words. You should deep dive into that. All right, let's take this discussion offline.